Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad to have you here today as we present the first of two webinars about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. My name is Joy Young. I'm Vice President of South Arts. Programs is where I spend most of my time. South Arts is your regional arts organization that serves 9 states. Our mission is advancing Southern vitality for the arts, and we do this work through a variety of programs, as you can see on your screen. Our work primarily focuses on serving individual artists, arts organizations. We also serve communities directly, as well as the kind of work we're bringing here for you today, and that is building leadership in the arts. I want to give a special thank you to our president and CEO, Susie Serkimer, and our board chair, Ben Rex, for the kind of support that they're giving to ensure that we're bringing these kinds of webinars to the field. We have a commitment to DEIA and capacity building in the field in support of the arts and ensuring that our commitment to equity is met. So today's webinar is being led by one of the nation's foremost experts in audience development. But before we get there, we know you're very eager to jump in. So let me share a little bit about our meeting etiquette. Please keep yourself on mute. Use the chat box for Q&A. There will be breakout rooms, and you'll be assigned to those randomly. Raise your hand using the features in Zoom under the various buttons on the bottom portion of your screen in order to make sure that you can be acknowledged. So we have our meeting etiquette. Let's move on. So today's gathering is an overview of DEIA and implementing it into organizational systems. Our presenter today, again, is one of the nation's foremost experts in this work. Donna Walker Kuhne has devoted her professional career to this work, specifically on ensuring access to the arts. She's raised funds in this work and is herself and has herself participated as an artist. So her commitment has been shown through the 30 years she's done in this work. Her commitment has been shown by the publications and the hundreds of presentations she's done. Not only would I consider Donna the authority, she is also an incredible advocate for arts and artists and BIPOC communities, those organizations that serve and are led by people who are identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC organizations. So without further ado, let me bring forward an amazing professional colleague and friend, our program leader, Ms. Donna Walker Kuhne. Welcome so much, Donna. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. It is so great to be here. I am so excited. So it's going to be a very robust 90 minutes. So I do hope you are all awake. We have much to accomplish. So first, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. And actually, if you would like to put in the chat where you are, if you know the unceded lands of where you are, you can put that in the chat as well. I'm in Brooklyn. So we gather today from many locations, and we acknowledge that we are in the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape, the indigenous people of this land. We honor the Lenape tribal communities that still remain in their homeland and those of the diaspora that were forced to migrate away. We respectfully acknowledge that from ancient times, the Lenape have lived in relationship with these lands and waters, and we pause to show our respect for their ancestors who lived here before the Lenape people today and their generations to come. So as Joy said, my name, Donna Walker Kuhne, and my lineage. I'd like to tell you a little bit about me so you understand why and how I approach my work. My lineage is that of the Mende people living in Sierra Leone and the Mandinka people living in Senegal. I am cisgender African-American woman, brown skin. I have on green today, green glasses and green shirt. I'm a daughter, sister, mother. I am fourth generation post-slavery. My parents were part of the Great Migration in the 1950s from the South to the North. And I grew up in Chicago in a very closely knit African-American community. But I was exposed to ballet at a very early age, which framed my passion, love, and commitment to the arts. And fortunately, I've been able to marry my passion for the arts with today's need to examine, change, and transform our cultural community by becoming anti-racist in our work. So I'm delighted to be with you today so that we can explore what some of these concepts are. My career has evolved from being a dancer, a lawyer, audience development pioneer, community engagement specialist, social justice, and now DEIA consultant. I wrote my first book, Invitation to the Party, highlighting what audience development looks like, and I just completed my second book, Champions for the Arts, which will be published in January. So I am here with you today as an advocate for dismantling racism in the arts. And I'd like to extend a sincere and warm thank you to South Arts for this opportunity to be with you. So the arts often challenge us to examine our perceptions and probe our fears. But most important, we engage with the arts is to engage with the dialogue, with the work and how we see ourselves in other, from music and dance to theater, spoken words, painting, sculpture, photography, design. But the arts historically have been our greatest source of light and hope, especially when we find ourselves mired in chaos, confusion, and darkness. So what do I think is needed at this time? Well, without safeguarding and engaging the arts at this juncture in our nation's history, we're likely to return to the previously unsustainable methods of tackling the effects of white supremacy and racial injustice. And we risk rehashing old ideas and ineffective policies that have done little to uproot the core values that justify the dehumanization and devaluation of the lives of the global majority. This most recent clash and onslaught of violence against our Asian American community is another example of the racism in our country. But I'm encouraged by the increase of land acknowledgements so that we can verbally state that the land on which we stand belongs to our Native American community, and we are here because they are not. So let's interrupt white fragility and build capacity to sustain cross-racial honesty by being willing to experience the discomfort associated with honest appraisal and discussion of internalized superiority and racial privilege. So the goal is not to feel guilty, but to understand your responsibility and your role to be a change maker. So what's important is how we can dismantle the behavior, culture, and attitude of racism, create spaces where staff of color feel valued, respected, and can speak their truth. Most importantly is the understanding that dialogue is the way forward. It's what's most needed today to help us reflect on our own beliefs and presumptions and challenges us to transform our inner biases that allow us, enable us to speak to people and behave with people sometimes in a disrespectful way. So that was my introduction, and now let's go to the slides. Okay, so our agenda, we did the overview introduction. I'd like to ask everyone for a participation commitment. What that means is that you are 100% present. You're not thinking about the grocery list. You're not thinking about what you got to do later on today, but I have you 100% in the room. You can raise your hand, you can smile, wave, anything, but we all need to make that commitment today. Do I have that? Wonderful, thank you. I also want to emphasize the significance of self-work. You know, this is, yes, we are going to discuss theories and concepts, but fundamentally, this is the work that each of you have to do, every single person. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that. I also want to unpack some of the vocabulary in this field of DEIA, you know, and look at some key terms, as well as microaggressions, unconscious bias, and allyship. We're definitely going to discuss some action steps, things that you can implement or certainly think about right away. I want to discuss the role of the board because the governance, policymaking, and fundraising initiatives are crucial. And how to start. Sometimes it's like, okay, where do I begin? Then we'll have a breakout session, a brief one to just kind of explore different concepts. And then we'll report back, wrap up, and talk about what you are going to do next. So does that sound like a plan? Great. Okay, next slide. So where are we now? I think we're in the process, and I should just preface this. The next few slides are the philosophical approach that I bring to my work. I don't think we just wake up and can just jump into, oh, I'm going to do DEIA today. I think it has to live and resonate within our whole bodies. And so I'm going to share with you the foundation upon which I use to be able to consistently, continuously, from an organic place, approach this work. So I think we're in the process. And when we think about DEIA, we're in the process. We've defined the need. It's articulated in a variety of ways within our arts sector. Many arts organizations have issued statements of support. They have on their websites. They've been board approved. There's certainly been funding allocated specifically for this purpose. I think we're on the cusp of implementation and sustainability that will allow us to assess the long-term impact. Slide. So one of my mentors, Daisaku Ikeda, encourages us to become pioneers of a better age. And I think this is the perfect time for us to think about this. There's no other solution to the problem of racial discrimination than realizing the human revolution in each individual. In other words, an inner reformation in the depths of people's lives to transform the egoism that justifies the subjugation of others and replace it with the humanism that strives for coexistence among all people. Because you have to think about, where does this come from? Where does this, live? And I think if we take full responsibility that when I can transform my behavior, then my environment changes. Next slide. So we're in the midst of 3 pandemics. We started with COVID-19, then we had the murder of George Floyd, and then we had the insurrection January 6th in Washington, D.C. So the political division that has come with all of that. So with these 3 pandemics, we have the opportunity of, how do we live? How do we make things happen in our lives? So I'd love to use this quote by one of my favorite writers, Arundhati Roy. She says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And that's where I think we are, ready to fight. So let's do it. Okay, next slide. So Sandra Jackson Dumont, who's now president of the Lucas Museum, reminds us that there's no end date for diversity, bias awareness, and inclusion work. If an organization is to ensure equitable access and opportunities for everyone, the work should be a part of the DNA of the entire organization. So one, it is forever work. So we want to make sure we understand that, and that the organization makes this commitment that it's going to become part of who we are, part of how we do business. Next slide. And Dr. Indira Etwaro from the Billie Holiday Theater in Brooklyn, she really emphasizes the importance of creating a brave space. So you're here, and obviously you care about making this happen, but the people that you work with, the artists, the staff, how do they feel about expressing how they feel? So we have to build brave spaces. So she talks about how to contribute to engaging diverse communities dealing with empowering the staff. So how does the staff feel that I can speak about things and not be in risk of losing my job or being judged as a, quote, troublemaker? So creating brave spaces enable us to create change. Imagining beyond physical and imagined boundaries, imagining beyond your circumstances. And she acknowledges that the civil rights movement, global community acts of revolution create brave spaces, and that's where people can step out and create change. So that's another important point. Next slide. Darren Walker, the Ford Foundation, whom I'm sure many of you are familiar with, has really been an incredible figure in the world of philanthropy. And one of the points that he really makes is about diversity. For him, diversity is excellence. And so when you're going back and people are saying, well, why is this so important? Why do we have to talk about diversity? Your response should be excellence. And that comes from Darren Walker, who manages a $14 billion portfolio of the Ford Foundation and has managed to garner support for many other foundations to serve multicultural arts organizations. So he's been absolutely exemplary. And Darren says, I think regrettably, diversity was framed by some and continues to be framed in a way that suggests that diversity correlates with the loss of quality. And actually, what the research shows, the empirical evidence is that diversity makes organizations better. The more diverse organizations are, the more excellent they are at whatever their mission. So he says, I don't talk about diversity without talking about excellence. Diversity is a contributor to excellence. Next slide. Then ultimately, where does this live again in our lives? I believe it's in our hearts. So it's the heart that matters. When you transform your heart, your everyday actions will undergo a change. You can even transform your environment. So the creation of an ideal world begins with the metamorphosis of a single individual. That's why it's so important that you are here. That's why we make these personal commitments, because we're the ones who are going to be the change makers. It's not pointing our finger out, it's pointing it inside to ourselves. Next. So let's look at some of the language. Diversity. And, you know, I'm sure we all have many, many definitions of diversity, but I like this one. It's brief. And it says representation of all our varied identities and differences, which include race, ethnicity, gender, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, tribe, caste, socioeconomic status, thinking, and communication styles. All of this embraces this concept of diversity. Sometimes we tend to just think about it in terms of race and ethnicity, but it's important that you consider all of these other components of this word as well. Next slide, please. Equity. So equity seeks to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness in access to information and resources. And so again, this is a really important concept, equity, because sometimes people will say, well, everybody has the same brochure. We all got the same information. Yes, but do I have the same opportunity? Do I have transportation to get there? Do I even understand what it's about? So access is what we have to unpack. Says we believe this is only possible in an environment built on respect and dignity, two really important qualities. Inclusion builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. So equity is about ensuring fair treatment, equality of opportunity. Inclusion is a culture of belonging, where I actually feel like I belong here, like, oh, I have a space here. Yeah, I'm going there. Yeah, I know this dance company. I'm going to go right on inside and have a seat, as opposed to I can't go in there. I don't know anybody there. It looks too foreign, too alien. You know, when I first started, was asked to work at the Public Theater with George C. Wolfe, I was very concerned about how I would feel included. I had never been inside the building, the Public Theater. I had walked by it, but it looked so big and it was so gorgeous. And I just said, I don't know anyone here, and I don't want people looking at me as if I don't belong. So I never went inside. It wasn't until he called to ask me to come and talk with him did I feel I had an invitation and that perhaps there was a place for me. And so this has nothing to do with education. Because I'm a lawyer. This has nothing to do with class. I'm a middle class person. It has nothing to do with those variables. This sense of belonging is really deep. I really want you to think about that very, very closely. Okay, next slide. So inclusion, as I mentioned, starts with this culture of belonging. And that's by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. That's why community engagement is so important, because that's where you get to include the people that are surrounding you. And you're asking them, what do you think? How should we best present this? You know, what would it take for you to feel like you belong? We believe, excuse me, we believe every person's voice adds value. So inclusion recognizes the distinctness and the uniqueness that each person brings. So it's not just that group, this established group, or my members, donors, long-term ticket buyers. It's also someone who's never been before. That person has equal value. And so we believe that no one person can or should be called to represent an entire community. So when you think about inclusion, that's not one person. So it's not about saying, yeah, we have an African-American that's, in our ambassador group. That person can't represent all of the Black people in that community. They can only represent themselves. And so asking one person, two people to be representative of a demographic, I think is setting up for failure. I don't think it's a good idea at all. So inclusion means we open up the space as broadly as possible. Next slide. Accessibility. So yes, people often think about people with disabilities and how the wheelchair access or making sure that elevators work, but it's also to make sure that people who have disabilities have the opportunity to participate in events, programs, and services equal to that of their peers without disabilities. So that's the important point. It's yes, we want to accommodate, them so that they can comfortably come in and come out, but we also want to, be confident that their experience will be of equal value, equal level. So when I broke my leg last year, I had tickets in advance for Alvin Ailey. I was concerned about, okay, I have to get to City Center. Okay, now I got to go up those steps. Okay, where am I going to sit? And then I got to make sure I can get to the bathroom in between intermission. I was thinking about all these things. And so I called in advance and explained, I said, I have a broken leg, I'm on crutches. So I hope that you can accommodate, my feeling comfortable. And they couldn't have been more kind and generous, making sure that I sat in an aisle that had a lot of space in the beginning, that I was on the end of the aisle, and that where I was right directly connected to where the bathrooms were. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We say, experience that's equal to their peers without disabilities. So that's my example of that. Next slide. So let's talk about some of our experiences and some of the behavior that we want to transform in this world of DEIA. Microaggressions. Every single person has experienced it. It's not just based on race and ethnicity. Sometimes women experience it, young people, older people. So microaggressions, small daily insults and indignities that are perpetrated against marginalized or oppressed people because of their affiliation with that particular group. Racial microaggressions are insults and indignities that are perpetrated against people of color. And so that's when you start to talk about a person's hair. And they'll say, oh, your hair looks nice. And that may be a person that maybe has straight hair, maybe a person who has locks like I do. They may say, oh, what kind of hairstyle is that? Why do you have that? Those are microaggressions, because now you're chipping away at my identity and who I am. Sometimes we see that reflected in colorism. So that there can be a favoritism for people who are more lighter skinned and thinking that perhaps they're more intelligent or less angry. And so there might be a comment made to, yeah, you should be more like her, pointing to a person who's more fair skinned than a person who's brown skinned. So microaggressions happen on multiple levels. But the point is, they're hostile, they're derogatory, they're negative messages that target individuals based on these categories of race, gender, sexual orientation. So we want to be mindful. What am I saying to people? When I see someone that looks different from me, how am I identifying that difference? And what am I saying it for? Is it a compliment? Am I questioning the validity of who they are? But microaggressions can be extremely painful. Next slide. The impact is that it's a reminder that you're less than, and it does psychological damage. It tells you that there's something wrong with you. That's what a microaggression suggests. There's something wrong with you. Regular exposure to microaggressions causes a person of color to feel isolated and invalidated. And the inability to predict where and when this may occur leads you to always be on hypervigilance because you're always worried about, okay, they're going to say something to me today. So then this person is coming into the office with anxiety. You're already depressed because you're anticipating what you're going to have to deal with for the day. And how do you steel yourself, the armor to be able to at least outwardly appear that it rolls off your shoulders, but internally it's like a knife that's stabbing in your heart. So microaggressions is something we absolutely want to look at and decide, I'm not going to do that anymore. I am going to be mindful and thoughtful about what I say. If I don't understand what it is, it doesn't have to be a statement. Perhaps it can be a question, more of, wow, that's really interesting. I don't think I quite understand, what you're wearing or how you look today. Is there a cultural reference? I would love to learn. That's a much kinder way than just attacking them and saying, yeah, she's feeling African today. Look at her, she got on that African fabric, something like that. And we hear these things, and they may be made off the cuff, but again, the impact, damage, does real damage. Next slide. So unconscious bias, that's another concept that we also want to correct. Because unconscious bias is the underlying attitude and stereotypes that people unconsciously attribute to another person or group that affects how they understand or engage with that person. So it's not the intention that microaggressions have where you want to say that, you know exactly what you're saying. Unconscious bias is you didn't even realize that, it could be based on a person's height. Unconscious bias is I prefer tall people. Unconscious bias is that if I'm in HR, I'm going to lean to the Ivy League school, even if they're not qualified. But the fact that they attended Harvard or went to Princeton or one of the Ivy Leagues, somehow I think they're better. That's my bias towards that, or unconscious bias. Oh, she has a family. She'll never be able to take this job because the kids are always going to keep her at home. That's your bias. You don't know what support system she may have or what commitment she may have. But all of these impact the decisions you make about that person and how you engage with them. So they're automatic, unintentional, and they have an effect on decision-making behavior. So as you're casting a play, you're looking at, what is my bias? They have to look a certain way. They have to come from a certain neighborhood. And that's unconscious. That's just how you're wired. And so again, thinking about what's behind the decision-making that I'm doing, is it inclusive? Is there equity? And does it bring diversity? That's the checklist that you want to apply. So common biases can include physically based biases, as I mentioned, with height, gender-based biases. Oh, we don't want a woman in this. No, we don't want a trans person because we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't want someone that's an LGBTQ because they're always going to be angry. These are biases, and people make decisions based on that. Age bias. My goodness, how many of us have experienced that? Either you're too young, too old, so no, we don't want one senior in this position because they're going to retire in a year. How do you know that? Gender-based bias, age biases, unconscious, but have a direct effect on decision-making. Next slide. So we're going to do a quick poll. I think Ethan is going to do for us. I'd like you to just put in the poll, which one of these is not an example of unconscious bias? A different accent, a single mom, an older person, lighter or darker skin, very attractive. How many biases do we have about that? Oh, just so handsome. Oh, she's so pretty. Yeah, does she have a brain? Can she do the work? Visually impaired, has a degree from an Ivy League. Is it any one of these or is it all of these? What do you think? You are absolutely correct. All are unconscious bias, every last one. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So what are things that we can do now? So certainly for white people or people who want to be allies for the LGBT community, allyship becomes a very important role that we can all play. And so as we talk about different roles, I'm going to suggest that this is for managers of how you can be an ally, particularly to your staff of color. So as a manager, how your colleagues navigate this very difficult time right now, it's really important that they feel supported by you as their manager. So if you proceed with business as usual, that suggests that you don't even care what's been happening, what's going on. It sends a message that you don't think it's important. And for staff of color in particular, it feels as if you're not valued. So example, the murder of George Floyd, how many managers were able to check in with their team, check in with your staff, check in with your artists. How are you? This is devastating. I can't imagine how you feel, but I want you to know I'm standing right next to you. I'm right here for you. Please let me know anything I can do. That's being an ally, or as we were anxiously awaiting the verdict, I got so many calls from my white friends and colleagues who said, my stomach hurts. I don't know if I can take it, this pressure of waiting for this, adjudication. What's going to happen? I'm just so hopeful that they're going to make the right decision. So I really felt and experienced the sense of allyship by them saying, I'm worried too. I don't know what's going to happen. If it's not the kind of decision that we want, we're going to see another major protest movement. And so those are things that we can do. So as you watch what's going on around you and you see the world, cycling in these very negative ways, please think about who can I be an ally to, how they must be feeling, or share that. I'm reading an article. Yesterday, I participated, one of my clients, we had a racial healing circle. And in this racial healing circle, we talk about different issues and concepts. And one of the participants was a young white woman. And she said, I was really nervous to participate in this racial healing circle because I haven't experienced racism, but I wanted to understand what you experience. And I want to understand how I can be more empathetic and more upstander and not a bystander. And we really appreciated that. That was a clear form of allyship. Next slide. So with the allyship, please speak to people. Please speak to the people you're around, whether it's your friends, your coworkers, colleagues, artists. So, and not just once, but make sure that when you meet them as a group, they understand that this is on your mind, it's important to you. So one of the things we did, one of my clients that I work with, right after the pandemic, and then moving more, actually more after the murder of George Floyd, every Tuesday there was an all-staff meeting, and we brought in a guest speaker every Tuesday to address the idea of racism. What does racism look like here? What are the things that are being done? What is being done from a legislative perspective? What kind of advocacy can you take? That was a clear statement that I see what's going on. I'm going to use my position to address this, and I'm bringing in other voices to help us understand more what this means. That's another way of addressing that on a consistent basis, not just one time, oh boy, this is terrible, I sure hope things work out, but making it more meaningful. And then also one-on-one, and so there's the group discussion you may have, but also you can call. I mean, right now it's mostly Zoom. So, making up a Zoom appointment and say, I just want to talk with you for a minute about how I'm feeling and how I can support you in any way possible. So also allies, continue your learning, build your ally skills. It's not necessarily, instantaneous, that it's something you want to keep polishing. And so you have your reading list and different books and articles, TED Talks that constantly inform you about how your behavior, can be part of this transformation that we all are seeking. So to be an ally is an active participation where you take risks to be different. So being an upstander, speak out, take action, as opposed to a bystander. Bystanders are, for instance, there's an incident happening on the street. We've unfortunately seen quite a few of those where people are being attacked. Now it's the Asian American community being attacked. And, one of the issues that we had here in New York, an older Asian American woman was being attacked, by an African American person, and no one stopped to help her. Not one person. And it was in the middle of the day on a street, and the bus driver saw what was going on. He stopped the bus and got off and tried to pull that person off of this young Asian woman until the police came. So that bus driver was a upstander, not a bystander. All the people walking by were shaking their heads and saying, "Oh, this is terrible," but they kept going. So being an ally means you take risks. So a risk could be you get popped too. That may be the risk. You decide what is the extent of how much I want to be engaged. Or you can say, for instance, you may be at a staff meeting and someone may make a comment that's just not complimentary. And you can just turn to that person and say, actually, that was offensive. That's being an upstander, as opposed to just shaking your head and saying, "Oh, that was terrible." That's not enough. Or you may decide to wait until later, one-on-one, and just say, when we had that meeting a few minutes ago, I was offended by what you said. We don't talk about people that way. So you think about it. What is my role? You're one or the other. There's no middle ground. You're either an upstander or bystander. So you decide which role is going to enable me to be part of this change. Next slide. So some of the action steps, that I'd like to share with you. We talk about DEIA, how to be as inclusive as possible when you're working with vendors. Many of you represent arts organizations, arts councils, different agencies. Who do you choose to work with? Of course, there's the low-hanging fruit. There's a printing company across the street. Worked with them for 300 years. Great. Here's an opportunity to perhaps make this more inclusive. Who else can you bring to the table? What artists are you utilizing and booking for these various events that, perhaps there's an annual tribute that you do, and you tend to go to the same person. But now we're going to look at this through the lens of DEIA. What else can we do differently? Who do we engage with the media in our marketing? We're trying to build our audiences, but at the same time, we're advertising in the same publications, but that's not where that community is. And so how deeply are you looking to look at diverse media sources? I know that print is very much moved away from being as impulsive, as important as it used to be, but certainly the digital world, looking at perhaps when we come back to the spaces, if there's collateral that you're distributing, but look at your marketing and promotional efforts to see how can I make sure it's through the lens of DEIA and not just what's safe, and not just feeling as if my campaign is going to be a success because I did a major ad in the major white newspaper, but what about all the other ones? That actually are going to reach the people you want to a much closer level. So these are some of the immediate kind of action steps you can think about. And then what is the personal and institutional preparation? So what other things can you do? Well, one of them is online training. Many arts organizations are now requiring all of their staff to participate in anti-racism, anti-bias training. I believe that should be the core of every arts organization. I just think that we now need to sensitize ourselves to what can be offensive behavior and to how we can grow and expand, because I believe the arts lead the way. So if we collectively can decide, okay, this is how we're going to do business, imagine the impact that's going to have. It's going to be global. And so I think that we should absolutely initiate this kind of institutional preparation with that, the online training, sometimes with the board engagement. I think the board should be very much involved, and we'll get to that slide in a little bit. But institutional preparation, to me, looks like the training, looks like building equity committees, empowering staff to take this on as part of their learning and development, looking at how to build employee resource groups. That is another way of empowering staff to look at areas that they want to amplify, areas to educate. One of my clients, we just built some of the employee resource groups, and the LGBTQ group, their first step was to create a dictionary because they felt that people just don't understand the language within the community. What does it actually mean? And that was probably one of the most illuminating staff meetings that everyone had, because we learned how important it is and the sensitivity to the language. And one of the staff persons actually just went through surgery. And so now there's going to be a much more welcoming response to this transgender employee, because we now understand what that means. And so I think these are ways institutions can start to prepare the foundation. Personally, as I mentioned before, it's making that commitment, it's deepening your antennas, it's being incredibly sensitive to what's going on around us, but also, what am I saying? How do I think about it? What is the lens that I'm using? For white people, it's understanding white privilege. It's understanding that, yes, I can sympathize, empathize with you, but I still get to be white. I still get to be able to go in the stores and not have to worry about who's looking at me, who's following me. And so what does that mean? How does that make you an ally? What do you think about that? So, here in my neighborhood here in Brooklyn, I live in a Hasidic neighborhood, and, my daughter's friends were outside playing. They weren't really playing, they was hanging out, standing outside talking, because they're in their teens. But one of the neighbors on the block called the police and told the police that there were some Black and brown kids on the street who did not belong in this neighborhood. We live here, but we didn't belong, according to this person. And so as a result, police came. They told me about this the day after, because they were just so shaken by it. And so I called the police precinct, and I reported a complaint against that person who filed that report. I asked them what else could I do as a citizen to prevent this kind of profiling. They encouraged me to attend the precinct meeting, the neighborhood association meetings. So I started to go to all of these different meetings and share what had happened. And so many people from the Jewish community came up to me at these meetings and said, please accept our apology. This is not who we are. This person made that phone call, but we don't want you to think that you're not welcomed here. And so, one of the community board meetings I went to, the board chair tried to silence me and say that, we heard this story already. We have someone else. I said, no, I'm not finished. I want everyone to know what steps we're doing. So I joined a racial healing group that's composed of the Jewish African-American community. And I started having these sessions in my home where we would just dialogue about who we are and our different backgrounds and how to be more supportive and respectful of each other. So I was inviting this community to come to these meetings. And then COVID hit literally the following week. So, we shut that down, and probably maybe next year we might resume that. But I'm just sharing this with you to talk about the personal action steps that we also have to take. And that as a person who was being victimized, these are the action steps that I took. And so that everyone has power, is how do we choose to use it? Next step, slide. So what's important also is not to depend on people of color for your racial education, and not to ask us to define what happened or to explain what happened. Do your research. There's so many resources out here to do that with, because frankly, people of color are exhausted, absolutely exhausted. Tired of explaining, tired of carrying the anger, tired of, being the person asked to translate what's going on. So please take action and decide, I'm going to figure this out through my own dialogue and my own workshops, my own, readings and watching documentaries. TED Talks are fantastic. There's quite a few of them. What's also important when we think about action steps is accountability. Who are you accountable to, whom, and when? And I believe that once we declare I am involved in this DEIA work, my first accountability is to myself. That I want to be able to wake up and go to sleep and know that I did my best today. And then, accountable to my publics, to my community, to the people we serve. So really important to think about accountability. And with that comes transparency. So that means that we have to be transparent as to what we're doing. So many organizations have put their statements on the website. They have, really tried to find ways to make this much more vocal, but it's really important that we find that transparency along with accountability. And then we talk about a human revolution. And I spoke about that before. This is personal, reflect on the work that you're doing. How can you really be transformative in your work? And what is your timeline? When do you begin? Well, if you haven't begun, you started today. Next slide. So the board of directors, towards DEIA, I think board members that join any board today should be willing to jump into this journey to examine how they experience race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and how do they see the world and how do they operate in that. So that should be something that is asked, that's discussed for any potential board member, and that the board should also be involved in training, discussions, and also how do they fundraise for successful and long-term DEIA. Next slide. Board recruitment should also reflect more diversity. So if it's the same people you go after, you'll never see that diversity on the board. And the answer is not, I couldn't find them. We're everywhere. It's how are you looking? Who was supporting you on that journey? And your commitment to not give up and not stop. And so it's really important to have a diverse effort towards board recruitment. Next slide. White board members that don't champion racial equity in a board meeting or fail to interrupt other white members on the board who might be engaging in paternalizing or direct racist behavior, they're supporting racism. Again, it's either yes or no. I'm either doing it or I'm not. And so it's being in that environment and you're seeing something that's being said or being planned that is racist, then it's an opportunity to speak up. Next slide. And board and staff, I believe, should learn together. I think that's where the magic happens, when they're both in the same room, figuring this out, both sharing their experiences, both really being thoughtful. So I really encourage that. These sessions would include reflection on issues of racial equity, how it impacts the mission of the organization, how it impacts the internal culture and operations. So the board needs to hear what the staff is thinking and grappling with, and the staff needs to understand the board's role in trying to provide support. Next slide. So now we're at our breakout portion. And this is what I would like you to do in the next 15 minutes, to sit in the breakout room and just address this question. What are you and or your organization currently doing to activate movement towards DEIA? What are you actually doing? And it could be we're thinking about it, or we started this, or we have an equity committee. But I'd like you to share what that is, because all of you are here to learn from each other. And so this way we can explore and talk about best practices. So we've got 15 minutes for you to really discuss what is it that you're currently doing. And then we're going to talk about later about what we're going to do in the future. So let's pop into the breakout rooms and come back in 15 minutes. I understand you have to hop off, some of you. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be directed to breakout rooms. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah. Screen. Okay. Are we all back? That's hard to tell. I think so. Okay, so yes, I'm speaking. Howell, you can't hear me? So 2 things. 1, I'd like to hear, were there any comments from your breakout group? And then 2, if you have any questions before I wrap up. So with some final thoughts. So this is our time for dialogue, conversation, anything that wasn't clear, some other points that you want to make, please, let's use this moment for that. Oh, you're putting them in the chat? Okay. Did you learn anything from the breakout groups from your colleagues? My group is great. They're doing some wonderful work. This isn't a new initiative. I think everyone's at different places, on this trajectory of how do I incorporate DEIA in my work. So the first step, again, as we started off today, is the commitment. And then we look at understanding the language of it. And then what are the action steps and who can be involved, whether it's the staff, the artists, the board, getting everyone involved, my community. So I think all those components are important. I think it's internal and external, the DEI work. So the internal work will be reflected externally. And then externally, you might look at some of your programming, you might look at how you engage your community ambassadors, your advisory groups. But that's how I feel we build robust and healthy audiences, artists, programming, with everything kind of moving together. Any thoughts?
I feel like one thing that felt important to me that I'm sure I was aware of, but kind of hit home in a different way, actually being in a virtual room with these folks, is that we're all in a variety of organizations and we have specific needs and goals that are unique to what we do. And yet there's so much that we can learn from, I had in my group folks who were with performing arts organizations and with sort of grant making and sort of, cultural oversight organizations. And so I think that, part of the toolbox should be making sure that we're checking in not just with what our own particular institutions do, but what others are doing for inspiration for those action steps that we can take.
And building a community, amongst your colleagues. Last month for the state of New Jersey, I was the chair for our DEI conference, the very first conference for the state of New Jersey's arts organization. It was a statewide initiative. We had 500 individuals from different arts organizations, and the theme was creating change, moving towards building a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there was a commitment made by these constituents that for the state of New Jersey's arts organizations, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to move forward, learning from each other, supporting each other, implementing these systems, and making sure that our artists, our staff, our team, everyone feels included, that they have a place to celebrate and to be who they are, to live in their truth. And that we hope to make this annual, but that was our first one. Statewide initiative.
Hi, this is Carla Hill in Miami, Florida. So I'm going to try not to geek out too much because I'm a huge fan of yours, Ms. Walker Kuhne.
Thank you. You seem familiar. Oh, we'll talk
yes,
about that later.
I helped South Arts along with Eric Fliss bring you to speak to some colleagues in the arts administration in Miami. But we'll catch up later. I wanted to say in our group, currently I am the director of diversity for a prestigious private school in Miami. But in our group, we mentioned that in the arts, we've been doing this work forever. Before DEIA was a thing. Initials. This is the work that we've always done as arts administrators, making sure that the arts is accessible to all. And it's been outside of arts administration, it's been hard. Talk about microaggressions or unconscious bias, people not recognizing that I've been doing this work for 10 or 15 years without it being an official title. Or an official DEIA, et cetera. So I want to commend everyone here for doing the work way before it was a thing. The other thing I brought up was that in the space that I'm working in now, we've done an anti-racism task force that's made up of people in our school community. But I think it's something that is that can be done to engage your stakeholders in the community. It does take commitment. We've met numerous times over the past year to give recommendations to our board of trustees. So if you have a board, that is an idea, a task force kind of thing that comes up with recommendations that the board will then have to implement. So, and then of course, our group members are doing great things in terms of trainings and just staying on top of things.
That's great. I like the idea of the task force. I really believe that children should really be our focus when we talk about the DEIA training. It really needs to be with our young people. I, again, just watch my daughter and how she interacts with her friends, and remembering, you know, as a child, what do they learn? How do they understand these differences? How are they celebrated as opposed to discriminated against? So again, we can look around our own circle to see who are we actually educating? What is our commitment to? Here we're colleagues, so we're thinking about our coworkers and our artists, but there's also other community members that we also want to address. So I think certainly in the arts education programs, I know they're having excellent professional development training now for teachers to understand how do we build the culture? Because this is essentially what we're saying, you know, and as you mentioned, Carla, yes, those of us in the arts, we were doing audience development for 5,000 years. This is my 40th year in the arts and business, focusing on audiences and community and building. What have I seen change in the 40 years? That's another workshop. But what I would say is that there is, you know, the importance of the awareness of the external, internal. Because even though, you know, I was really working hard, because, you know, I taught myself to be an arts administrator while I was practicing law, prosecuting juveniles. So on my lunch hour, I did volunteer work in an arts organization. So I taught myself what it means to be an arts administrator by reading the materials that I was filing. I was just putting stuff away in the file. I just wanted to be in the arena of the arts, you know, but even then, it was from an external place. I wasn't thinking about what needed to happen on the inside. And much of the work that I did, you know, with Dance Theater of Harlem, the public theater, the cultural institutions was usually external. How are we engaging the community? The difference I see now with the DEI work is that this is very much internal. This is really looking at organizational behavior. How do we change the culture? Who we are, what do we say, and what is the perception people have? So that's, you know, I think that's a really important distinction too. Yeah. Yes, Russell, Joel Brown.
Hi, so one of the things that came up for me as we were talking is that it's not 1970 anymore, and it's not 1960 anymore. And the things that we have been through as a nation and as a world require frank and clear conversations if we want to make progress. And so I think that the time has passed for, you know, niceties and tiptoeing around the things that are before us.
Yeah.
And it seems that as an organization, we have to be honest with each other first before we go to the community and ask for their honesty and give them our honesty about what has been and about where we want to go.
Excellent point. Because the work that we're doing internally will then reflect externally. But it goes back to the brave space. So many people I talk to, they're afraid to speak out. And they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to be labeled. So organizations have to create this brave space. We have to do that. And that's culture. And that comes from the leadership. It starts at the executive level. So I don't know how many EDs and ADs that we have here on this call, but that's where the initiative develops. You know, it's from there, because then everyone can see, oh, I better pay attention. This is serious. This is important. There's one thing for the marketing director to say, oh yeah, we got to do this, is great. Or even the HR person, wonderful. But when the ED, AD, that's a whole different conversation. So that's what we want to see the change, you know, evolve from there. Yeah. Russell Brown, you related to Karen Brown? I thought so.
Yes, that's my big sister.
Wonderful.
Hi.
I love this. It's like a reunion. Any other questions, thoughts? Yes, Beth Lee.
I was on mute. Got it. So it wasn't so much a question or a comment. We talked about this in our group, and one of the things that I do when working with grantors and donors is evaluate their application process. Because one of the things that we consistently see is that the application is inequitable. It asks questions that favor organizations that are white dominated, as well as how the information is disseminated, and then how the awards are coming to pass. So even if a grantor or funder does not request that we evaluate their application, we go back and do it anyway. We also suggest and give it to them. We also discuss the weighted questions and which questions are weighted. One of the things, the trends we saw here, where there were more questions about DEIA, but they didn't hold any weight to your actual determination. So they just wanted to ask the information. And when we challenged them on that, they said, we just want to garner the data. We just wanted the data. You know, and even one of our founders, actually, funders had said, well, we had more Black applicants this year, and that's what our board wanted. So they weren't necessarily interested in awarding to more Black organizations. Yeah, I'm sorry, my dog is having zoomies back here.
Okay.
Some very large Labrador that is really excited right now. But they just wanted to collect the data. And so it's challenging the organizations with funding because that is a big deal. Wherever your money comes from often determines the decisions.
You just perfect. Excellent point. Are you all familiar with that report from Dr. Zanny Voss? It's on the alchemy of arts organizations. It is excellent. I will send the link to Joy and Ethan. They can send it to you. But she interviewed about 20 different arts organizations from a philanthropic perspective and really talked about the trends of funding, who's surviving, who's thriving. It is an excellent, excellent report. You should definitely be familiar with that. It was published by the Wallace Foundation, so it's on their website. But to your point about, you know, the granting process, that's probably where we see the most Eurocentric impact more than any place else. And again, it goes back to power and privilege. And who deserves this? Who should get it? And it has to fit within this paradigm as opposed to understanding how people live in their culture. How do they even describe their work? Can't even write it down. Maybe it's a video application. You know, and how long does it have to be? And what are the hours for submitting the application? My family, we founded an African dance company in Chicago over 40 years ago. And my older sister is the executive director. And, you know, it takes her, I don't know, 2-3 days to fill out a grant application. And so she missed the deadline for one of the applications because it was Eastern Standard Time and she thought it was Chicago time, which is an hour difference. And she was just terrified that she had missed this opportunity. I said, please write to them and let them know you misunderstood the time, but you have the application completed. And so she did, and they, you know, allowed her that exception. You know, but there's such a cultural difference in how people approach money. How do we describe our work? What is the language to describe that? I've been on a funding panel for the past 3 days for the Ontario Arts Council, and it's just been fascinating, you know, just understanding how people apply, what do they consider their work, how it's described, and what are the metrics for success? How do we decide, did we do it or not? You know, and I think it's way too early for any of us to decide success, quite frankly, that's my opinion. But I do believe that we are on the journey. But you'll know success when you start to see your staff look different, when you start to see people speaking up differently, when you start to see the board more reflective of the communities you serve. You start to see your audiences coming, not because you pushed them and told them you had to come, they can't wait to come. That's when you'll see. So that to me is what the metrics of success looks like. Not so much the numbers, but it's more the observations, the feelings, the sense of community, the sense of what it looks like. And as you said, that's not just numbers, because what does that mean? But it's more, what do the people mean? And what are they saying? And so, you know, when I was at the Public Theater, every day I went to work, I had a vision in my head of what I wanted the audiences to look like. So I encourage all of you to have a vision. What does DEIA look like? for where I am committed to at this moment in time. What does it look like? And then daily, that's what you're striving to accomplish. So you build your circle of support, always have your allies, always, always. Build your circle of support. Should be some on the board, should be some staff, some senior staff, community leaders. You need that group of people that say, yes, we're moving forward. And then you have your systems in place, look at your strategies, your tactics, and then you can start to really roll that out, I think in a really conscientious way, smart way. Because again, it is reporting back to the funders on what did we accomplish, because much of the work that we want to do, the training and all of that, we're looking for financial support. So we know that there are some measurements that have to conform, but you also have the ability to educate and say, yes, we understand that you're looking for this set of metrics, but we want to tell you this is actually what our people are saying and doing. And so I think we have this moment now. The door is slightly open. I'm encouraging you to put your foot in and push that door open to say, this is what our community needs now. It's just like the quote that I shared earlier from Arundhati Roy. Do we have to drag all these systems from the past? Or can we come through this portal with one piece of luggage, one suitcase? That's it. So I think this is our moment. I'm encouraging all of us to grab it, claim it. Because to me, the consequences of returning to the pre-pandemic, and it's such a disservice to the art. At the end of the day, that's the only reason we're all here. There's some part of us that loves the art. So if we continue to honor that, then that can be our North Star. So then everything supports that. That's why I get up every morning and do this. So what is this from Jordan? You said what time is it? Okay. You said, I find it very difficult to get thoughts, feedback, and critique from the jurors. Really?
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay.
I shared it with you before.
All the panels I'm on, we have to give our feedback. I don't know if it's an option.
So right now, I've been applying to different grants that have been.
Oh, as a grantee.
As a grantee,
Sorry.
yeah. So I don't get. Yeah, so I don't get really any feedback. I just hear hey, unfortunately, we're unable to select you, or you weren't selected for the funding. We invite you to reapply. I'm like, okay, so what's next? Like, how do I apply? So the only organization thus far is Arts Greensboro, that Arts Council. They went back and had informed me both in a formal email and in person. Was like, hey, we didn't pick you, but we do have some notes and feedback for you that you reapply at the next cycle. And then we did a follow-up meeting where we had a one-on-one discussion about what parts were missing, what was lost in translation. And that was wonderful, because that's exactly what I needed, so I can go ahead, prepare, and do better on the next one. Oftentimes, and it's very much like a job application, it's someone applies and they don't necessarily give you feedback on why they didn't pick you. It's just we didn't pick you, good luck on your future endeavors. And even when we talk about breaking down these barriers, I think some of that that particular practice can be harmful, because that's exactly what was brought up in the task force when Arts Greensboro did a diversity task force, talking about how can they as a council better help organizations. And they were like, we need some help. Like, we applied to this, we did that, we did all these other things, and we're still not getting the funding. What is it that's stopping us from being picked?
That's the third workshop. So my experience with that question, again, I'll go back to my dance company. We have excellent dancers, choreography. We go to Africa, we have workshops, we've done all of this, but still perceived as a community-based organization. So how do you take that leap? I think, yes, it is actually an important question, Jordan, because you're asking it in the context of DEIA. And I do believe there is that perception that based on the work that you're doing or what you look like, it cannot possibly be competitive with our major arts organizations. So we're going to give you the little 5,000, just enough to pay for two mailings. And then that's about it. And so again, I think that how do you break through that? I think you have to be incredibly strategic. incredibly strategic, and really study the matter carefully to see, okay, what is it that they're looking for? What's the competition? Who can I align myself with? Find your allies. You know, that's a whole campaign, but you don't give up. Don't ever give up, ever.
Oh, I won't be
ever.
giving up. Oh,
Pardon?
I will not be giving up. Absolutely
Good.
not.
That's right, honey. This is all of ours. So I'm just going to conclude because I want to be respectful of your time. And I just had a couple of more thoughts to share with you. Ethan, if you can just pull up the remaining, I think it's 2 slides, 3 slides. That would be wonderful. Okay, we did that. You rocked on that. Okay, so the recommendations, which we've talked about, I do believe having a consultant can be very helpful because having that objective eye and voice can be extremely useful. Online training, that's something you can start right away. Just start to do that, you know, look into various programs. Reading groups, that's something you can form to start reading books that inform this topic. Forming perhaps your ERGs, looking at a board DEIA committee, and including these cultural acknowledgements and statements of solidarity. All this looks to building culture. Next. And remember, long term. This is not going to happen overnight. This work never stops. This is forever, ever work. And I think that we build these relationships and we feel that this initiative is positively reshaping our internal work culture. So rather than feel heavy about it, like, oh my goodness, I got to do this again. This is, yes, we're rebuilding our internal work culture so that it is going to be more respectful, more joyful. So that's kind of the language and perspective that you want to bring to this as well. And then next slide. No shortcuts either. So it's not going to just be, okay, if I do this on Monday, we're going to be done by Friday. No, there are no shortcuts or silver bullets for building these inclusive workplaces. But as an ally, you can say, I'm doing the work and I'm influencing the decisions and I'm moving this forward. That we can do, which may not make it feel so laborious, but in fact, this journey is the same as when I'm building a work of art. It's the same journey, similar journey. Okay. And then as we were told at the inauguration, next slide, that the new dawn blooms as we free it for this, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, thingy, because there's always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. I believe each and every one of you are brave enough to be it. I think that's why you're here and why you have participated so, you know, vigorously. And so we can bring this new dawn. That's us. That's the role of the arts. And I find that really exciting. You can take the slides down now. So it is 4:59. If you want to take one moment and just put one sentence in the chat about what you're going to do tomorrow that touches DEIA tomorrow, what would that look like? Just throw it in the chat. Get this. We make causes. That's why we do this. We're making causes. Move it forward. Well, I know one thing you're going to do. You're going to wake up. Okay, great. Continue the fight from the inside. Yes. TED Talk. Absolutely. Talk about this tomorrow. You're welcome. Participate in this conversation. Excellent. Excellent. Ask your group, what do they think? Apply for more grants. That's right. It costs money. Everything costs money. Thank you. Thank you. Read the reports. I have a reading list that I'm happy to share because there are things that I find inspiring and educational. So I'll definitely make sure you get that. Amplify others' powers. Yes. Support each other. Process your notes. Personal research journey. Yes. Up standards. Yes. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, South Arts. I look forward to hearing about all that's happening in your region of the country. I'm keeping my eye on you.
Thank you so much, Donna. A special thanks to Ethan, who's on the back end helping keep this together. Ethan! And let's give Donna a round of applause, folks. Thank you so much, Donna.
You're welcome.
And we look forward to having you on the next webinar next month. Stay tuned. And thanks again for joining. Good night.
Bye-bye. Bye.